In 2014, the world acknowledged, it doesn't quite seem right to say celebrated, the 100th year anniversary of the beginning of World War I. So art museums all over Europe and America offered special World War I exhibits. This quote is from a Los Angeles Times article that captures the theme of most of these exhibits. The author continues, World War I shaped the notion of what art is, just as it forever altered the perception of what war is. Again, it began along with millions of idealistic young men who were cut to pieces by machine guns and obliterated by artillery shells. There was another major casualty of World War I, traditional ideas about Western art. So let's see what he means, and let's go back and look at some of the traditional Western art that we visited in our last unit. So we've looked at art at various times in this course. Most recently, we explored Romanticism, which itself was a rebellion against Enlightenment reason and the Napoleonic Wars. We left off with Realism, which is an art that often reflected sympathy with the working class and socialism. It was really inspired in many ways by the Industrial Revolution, another topic of our course. I haven't, however, talked about the most important artistic movement of the late 19th century, Impressionism. It's a period many of you will recognize, I suspect, and most of you probably like. This is art that's easy to like. So what feelings do these paintings convey? What kind of mood do they have? What kind of mood do they give you? What seems to be happening in this slide? Is this a party? What kind of a party? What kind of people are these? So not all Impressionist paintings are cheerful, but overall I think they convey a rather optimistic view of the world and an interest in the lives of ordinary people. We're not just seeing portraits of kings and nobles. We're seeing regular working people on a Sunday afternoon going to a party, dancers not giving a performance, but at the point where they're listening to their instructor, just a little girl caught in a moment. All in all, in these paintings, though, life seems to be going pretty well, which is how most people saw the world on the eve of World War I. Now, you'll notice that while these paintings portray real, identifiable people and places, they are not entirely realistic. Indeed, they are impressionistic, your impressions of a scene. That term was actually meant as an insult. It was first used by an art critic who thought these were lousy paintings. But the painters themselves liked the term and they adopted it. So, do you have any thoughts about why painters might have been moving away from realism, other than the desire of each generation of artists to do something entirely different from what their parents did? Well, here's one answer. What is it? Well, the answer is the advent of photography. By the way, this is not a scene from World War I. Any guesses? It's actually the battlefield at Gettysburg. The American Civil War was the first war really to be photographed. It was also a war that should have warned Europeans about what was coming. But photography rather stole realism's thunder, and artists were looking for a new way to capture their world. Take a look at this 1950 painting by an Italian artist. Now, this is not Impressionism. It has a more modern feel. But what I want you to focus on is, what is the feeling it conveys? What does it seem to be saying about war? Actually, this artist was part of a group that were called the Futurists. It was a group of Italian painters. And truly, they almost worshipped war. They worshipped speed and power and technology, and war seemed to be a part of all that. We've talked about how Europeans initially welcomed the war, even felt kind of liberated by it. War was how the fittest survive, right? War was where we show our might, our technological prowess, the superiority of our nation over those other nations. And I think this painting has a little of that spirit, which is creepy, especially since we know what's coming. In your notes template, you'll see the full text of one of the most famous poems inspired by World War I. It was written by Wilfred Owens, who was a young man who was killed in action the last week of the war. I've put the first two lines on the slide, but you should take a look at the last lines as well. I've bolded and underlined them in your notes. So one of the great historians of this period, Paul Fussell, argues that the war's greatest artistic effect was the rise of irony as the major way the so-called lost generation expressed itself. So what is irony? It's one of those terms thrown around by English teachers. What does it mean? Well, the title of this poem is a great example of irony. It's taken from a poem by the Roman author Horace, and the full quote is Dulce Et Decorum Est pro patria mori. It is sweet and right to die for your country. So look at these two lines from the poem. Is the author describing something that's sweet and right? No, he is using the term ironically. In other words, he is expressing meaning by using words or images that actually mean the opposite. By the way, this painting is by a famous American artist, John Singer Sargent, and it was actually commissioned by the British government for a war memorial. But much of the art inspired by World War I was much more nightmarish and surreal as opposed to realistic than Sargent's painting. So I'm going to show you a series of drawings and paintings by one artist, Otto Dix, a German artist who volunteered enthusiastically for the army in 1914. He was a German, was decorated for bravery, fought all the way through, but as the war dragged on, he became appalled by the carnage and increasingly angry at what he saw was the older generation's complete disregard for the lives of the young men it was sending into the trenches and making rush into machine gun fire. So this one's self-explanatory, isn't it? By the way, Dix survived the war and went on to paint very unattractive and critical scenes of Germany in its post-war era. This one is also, I think, self-explanatory and really a spectacular depiction of the trenches. So what point do you think the artist is making here? Well, what I really notice is the contrast between that bright rising or setting sun, it's a little hard to tell, and the dead landscape, the crows that are probably scavenging for the dead, the trees without leaves. It's winter, presumably, but it's also a kind of winter of our soul, a winter of the world. Is the sun setting on a world that's disappearing? Is it maybe rising? Is there hope? It's interesting ambiguity. And here we see Dix's depiction of wounded veterans, another common theme of Dix's work. This painting is entitled La Mort, Death. What do you see? Well, I see skeletons and what look like explosions. They could be fireworks, colors that are vibrant, but also jarring, disturbing. So the painting on the left, also by Otto Dix, is entitled The Dying Warrior. And we've come in a short period of time, a very long way from that celebration of sort of armed masculinity in the armored train. We've come even further from the Impressionists, from this. So, you've had a chance to look at some literature and some art. I'd like to close with a clip from an opera that was composed during and immediately after World War I. The story, it's complicated. It's basically about poor people who are exploited by everyone around them. And if you want to get the whole story, you can Google Wozzeck on Google Wozzeck on your computer and you'll get lots of information. But what I want you to notice particularly are the themes that come out in this song. It's in German, but there are subtitles. And even more, the way the music is composed. What strikes you about this music? So listen to it and then I'll come back. The term used for this kind of music is atonal. That means that the composer is not putting the work into a clear key, such as D major. He's actually partly using the 12-tone key of a composer named Schoenberg, but that's getting too complicated. Basically, what you really should notice is that the way the music envelops, the way the notes skip around, they don't resolve clearly, we don't have an obvious tune. It jars our senses, and that is completely deliberate. So what do you think? What might this have to do with the aftermath of the Great War?